Now, I want to start out with what I think is probably the most important kind of news that we're beginning to piece together, and that is that uh, it, this basically, hold on, is the whole idea of how this is all developing. Uh, a bombshell that basically what we're finding is that Comey as head of the FBI and Loretta Lynch as the Attorney General under the Obama administration they were the ones who colluded in a scheme to essentially have spies in Donald Trump's campaign, and the entire intelligence community looks like it was involved. Looks like some of the idea here originated from John Brennan, but it involved James Clapper, who was the head of DNI, the director of national intelligence, and it involved the NSA, was also doing the physical intelligence after the FISA warrant was granted. But it was all based on the idea of this narrative that Donald Trump was colluding with Russia. As I explained yesterday, the basis of this was that originally the break-in of I think by Seth Rich, of the DNC computers. Seth Rich was an employee of the Democratic National Committee who was disillusioned because Hillary and Debbie Wasserman Schultz were doing everything they could to make sure that Bernie Sanders lost the primaries, the Democratic primaries. And they decided they'd blame these emails on Donald Trump after Donald Trump made a kind of stupid statement that if Russia had broken into the DNC computers, maybe they could give out the 30,000 hacked emails. I think it was one of Donald Trump's off-the-cuff remarks, but it stimulated the idea that if only the Democrats and this deep state, I refer to in Killing the Deep State, this conspiracy beginning within the FBI, if only they could plant people within the Trump campaign and then have a basis for getting electronic surveillance. Well, certainly one of these plants, this in an entrapment scheme, a spy, would talk to someone in the Donald Trump campaign, maybe like Jeff Sessions, about easing sanctions with Russia. And if that could get placed on tape, these conspirators thought, that would be the quid pro quo. In other words, Donald Trump would say during the campaign, Russia will ease sanctions on you after I get to be president, if only you go steal all these emails from Hillary and the DNC and publish them in WikiLeaks. Now, as preposterous as that seems, that appears to be what they were trying to do. Gordon Carr, thank you very much. Now, once these various plants got in place, and you'll see here a pattern developing where conversations were attempted to be begun with the Trump campaign. Now, first of all, this involved coordination with British intelligence, who was probably spying on the Trump campaign and giving the information over to Hillary and to the Obama White House, because we spy for Britain, where the British agencies can't spy on their own people, and the same MI6 and the others around the world. There's about 5 or 6 of them, intelligence agencies that work together in this fashion. And so they produced this Christopher Steele, who generated this dossier about Donald Trump and how Donald Trump was really colluding with Russia. And the dossier could not be validated, of course, by at all by the FBI. But it doesn't matter. That was the basis on which they were going to go forward and say that there was collusion. Okay, so as we follow this narrative through, what the Democrats decided, the deep state decided, this is, Comey, Loretta Lynch, Hillary, Obama, and Valerie Jarrett, they decided that they could begin using ways to get the campaign officials, like Sessions, Donald Trump Jr., to talk with one or other of their entrapment plants, their spies. Now, one of the big efforts was made with this Natalia Veselnitska, who is the attorney the Russian lawyer who was trying to set up Donald J. Trump in a discussion in the Trump Towers. This scheme was that she was supposedly going to bring information about Hillary that was detrimental, like opposition research that came from Russia. When they got together, and by the way, this Russian lawyer was granted a visa to come into the country by, appears, Loretta Lynch. So it's pretty much a setup all the way around. When they got together, all they talked about was this law, this Magnitsky law, that had to do with a reprisal against Russia for killing some of Russia's operatives in London with plutonium. It was a long story. But at any rate, the discussion went nowhere, and Donald Trump Jr. was not interested. But this is the kind of setup. Because, soon after the meeting, Clinton and her campaign flunkies began slamming Trump for his ties to Russia and Putin. And then they leaked the meeting to the press and tried to say that through this lawyer, Donald Trump was colluding with the Russians. The Democrats alleged Donald J. Trump, on the behalf of his father, had this meeting, and the meeting was now part of Special Counselor Mueller's criminal investigation to see if Donald Trump had colluded with the Russians during this meeting with this Russian lawyer, which only lasted a few minutes and he got rid of her. But this is part of the pattern. And what's happening is we're finding out that as you had the deep state, the FBI, planning these various moles, these various spies within the Trump campaign, and then they were linking them together to see if they couldn't talk to one of the campaign officials. Because the way the electronic surveillance worked under FISA, it was granted by the court only on Carter Page, I think another FBI paid informant, who penetrated, he in 2015 been involved in a Russian sting in the United States, with him operating as an inside Russian, inside the U.S. Russian contact, working with these criminals that the FBI did indict in 2015. Carter Page appears to have played the same role with the Trump campaign. V. Penley, thank you very much. And once the electronic surveillance was on Carter Page, if Carter Page talked to, say, Jeff Sessions, well, now Jeff Sessions' is collateral interest could be under the FISA electronic surveillance. Because remember, the FISA court's supposed to prevent electronic surveillance of U.S. citizens unless they're involved in a plot with foreign nationals that's criminal. So this thing looks to me like it was all entirely a setup from the very beginning. And it's now unraveling very, very fast. Because as we see this Halper, this Stephen Halper, who is about 73 years old, a Cambridge professor, but had very deep experience with the U.S. administrations going back to Jimmy Carter, was contacting Papadopoulos, another marginal figure in the Trump campaign, but inducing him to come over to London where they could talk about information about, the dirt that Russia had on Hillary, none of which materialized, but it's entrapment. See, entrapment means that you are trying to create a crime. If you put a agent inside a group that is dealing drugs with Mexico, and the agent participates and gathers evidence, that's legitimate under the law. If you place an agent in with a group that is not dealing with drugs with Mexico, but the agent creates the plots and induces the group to begin committing that crime, that's illegal. Because you can't entrap somebody into committing a crime that they wouldn't otherwise do. That's the dirty part of this, is that each of these moles that Clinton and Obama put into the Trump campaign were put there to create evidence of Russian collusion when none existed. That's the crux of why this is so incredibly shocking. And it's coming out now very fast, and it's changing the nature of the entire discussion. That's the critical point. Now, Donald Trump today, after he had his meeting with the South Korean president, had comments in the Oval Office, and he said a lot of people are saying that the deep state had spies in my campaign. If they had spies in my campaign, that would be a disgrace to the country. It would be very illegal, aside from everything else. It would make probably every political event look like small potatoes. So we want to make sure that there weren't any spies. I hope there weren't any spies, frankly. Okay, now, what Donald Trump is telegraphing there today is that he knows now that this entrapment scheme was real. And he knows that this was the deep state committing crimes, which was the beginning of the coup d'etat.